Okay, in this video, I'm going to talk about control of ventilation. And so before we can talk about how we control it, we just need to understand what aspects of ventilation we can control. So the total pulmonary ventilation in liters per minute is kind of equivalent to cardiac output in that it is the product of the tidal volume, or the liters per breath, and the ventilation rate, or breaths per minute. And so the tidal volume is the amount of air you move with every breath. And so this is a normal tidal volume indicated right here. Maximal tidal volume is referred to as vital capacity, and that's shown right here, where you breathe in as much as you possibly can and breathe out as much as you possibly can. Note that there's still a residual volume left here. Even when you breathe out as much as you can, you still leave some stale air in your lungs, and that stale air doesn't have any oxygen in it really, and it has very little CO2. It has a lot of CO2 in it rather, and it's not contributing to ventilating your lungs, and that's why that residual volume is always subtracted from a measurement of tidal volume. And the ventilation rate is the number of breaths per minute. So we simply take the time and the number of breaths to calculate that. And so then we multiply those together to get the alveolar minute volume, or total pulmonary ventilation. And the frequency of breathing and the depth of breathing, which is the tidal volume, are determined by how often and how strongly skeletal muscles contract. And so obviously you've got a stronger contraction of the respiratory muscles to get your vital capacity than you do for this smaller tidal volume right here. So breathing is a rhythmic activity, but it's not autorhythmic. And the and it's largely involuntary, so you just breathe along without even thinking about it. But if you're asked to hold your breath, or to breathe more slowly, or breathe more quickly, then you do have some control over that. And the way this works is your normal breathing rhythm is established by a cluster of neurons in your brain that are called a central pattern generator. And the central pattern generator is located in the brainstem. So these are a cluster of neurons that generate action potentials at a certain frequency. And these action potentials are delivered to respiratory neurons in the medulla oblongata, and they synapse with the inspiratory and expiratory motor neurons. And remember, motor neurons control skeletal muscle, and so those inspiratory and expiratory motor neurons control the inspiratory and expiratory skeletal muscles. So this central pattern generator is determining how often and how strongly these skeletal muscles contract. And that's determining the rate and depth of your breathing. Well, how obviously you don't always breathe at the same rate and the same depth. There's a lot of variation in your respiration patterns. So what influences this central pattern generator in your brain? Well, there's several things. Probably the most important factor under normal circumstances is carbon dioxide and hydrogen ions, or pH. So you have central chemoreceptors, so these are chemical sensing neurons that are located in your central nervous system that respond to carbon dioxide and pH. And when carbon dioxide levels get high in your blood, which is also associated with lower pH, then that causes an increase in your respiration rate. You also have voluntary control and emotion. So sometimes when people are under emotional duress, they will hyperventilate, or they might hold their breath on purpose, or change their breathing rate on purpose. But you can't override these chemoreceptors. So no matter how long you try to hold your breath for, your central and peripheral chemoreceptors that we're going to talk about in a minute will override your voluntary control of breathing. So when a child is having a temper tantrum and they're holding their breath, just make sure they're safe, and if they pass out, that you catch them, but they will start breathing again because you cannot override these receptors. The peripheral chemoreceptors are in the aortic arch and carotid artery, same place you have baroreceptors, and they respond not only to hydrogen ions and CO2 the way the central chemoreceptors do, but they will respond to oxygen, but only under extreme conditions of hypoxia. So at normal altitude and under normal conditions of a partial pressure of oxygen in the atmosphere, the levels of oxygen will never affect your breathing rate. It's CO2 and pH that are the most important factors. However, if you go to high altitude, the low oxygen in the atmosphere, the low partial pressure, will lead to an increase in respiration rate. But remember, this is only under extreme conditions of hypoxia, and probably in your life you may never experience low oxygen causing a change in your respiration rate unless you go to high altitude, for example. So normally a decrease in pH or an increase in the partial pressure of CO2 will cause an increase in your respiration rate. So when you're exercising, what's causing your increase in respiration rate is CO2 and hydrogen ions produced as a result of that increased metabolic activity. And decreased respiration rate happens if the pH starts to go up or the levels of CO2 go down. So you vary your respiration rate on a minute to minute basis to keep the partial pressure of CO2 at a homeostatically regulated level in your blood, because remember, CO2 is correlated with the pH of your plasma. So if you have too much CO2 in your blood, you're becoming too acidic. You need to increase your respiration rate to get rid of it. If you don't have enough CO2 in your plasma, you're getting too alkaline, and you have to reduce your respiration rate to retain CO2. And again, oxygen only influences respiration rate under extreme conditions, so not very often would oxygen be a factor.